Recording. Peyton, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, Ben. How are you doing today?
I'm good. It's been, I think, a few months since we last spoke. So I know you've been hard at work. There's been a lot of changes in the Cardano ecosystem. Where do you think we should start?
Um, the latest with Cardano is governance, right? It's been cracking along. For many years there were, centralized entities that ran Cardano and stated that one day it was going to be, decentralized and owned by the community, and now that day is here. So it's exciting times.
Can you explain how that whole thing works? I think that's a topic that even confused me for a while to really grasp what that means.
Yes, certainly. So it's really it's an on-chain government. If it's imagine a digital government, but instead of, us having jurisdictions and being bounded, maybe there's a river in between two countries. It's a digital blockchain with, essentially constituents all over the world. There's three different branches of the government that is Cardano. The first one is DREPs, and anybody can be a DREP. If you have like 500 ADA in your wallet, you can make some keys and be a DREP. And then there's the Constitutional Committee. And then they just, there's a constitution now for Cardano that was enacted on chain. And they verify that, the constitution's being upheld, because you or I, anybody in the world, we could submit a proposal on chain, to change parameters, what's the block size, stuff like that. Or we could, ask for money of, hey, we're going to make Cardano better in this way, give me 500K, that sort of thing. And the constitutional committee, ensures that the proposals that are being submitted are constitutional. And then the third branch of government is the SPOs, those that are minting blocks. And every single, branch kind of votes on different things and is a check and balance, for the other branch essentially. So,
That's
that's
so
how it
cool.
works.
So in theory, like let's say that this kind of technology were involved in more of a country's government, because I know that a lot of people, that's the concept they can grasp. It basically gives the power back to the people, right? In a more literal sense. Because for right now, we're trusting on a lot of things going the way that we're told that they're going. Whereas if it's
Hmm.
done with governance in this structure, you can a lot more accurately see exactly how things are going. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's still new. So it's a bit less convoluted, I would say. I think that there could be a world where people do lose sight a little bit because there's so much going on. It's hard to keep up with. And,
Got it.
with the DREP system, I don't think, a lot of people really want to participate in governance ultimately. So what you do, a lot of people, they delegate their voting power to somebody that they trust to kind of bring them towards the direction that they hope for. So there's some similarities, right? Because a lot of people, at least in America, they don't, vote all of the time. I know some people that do and some people that don't. So, it's similar in that sense.
Totally. No, 100%. That was actually one of the things that attracted me to Cardano 4 or 5 years ago was the forward thinking of what systems are in theory good but aren't being executed well, and can technology kind of come in and try to solve those. And it seems like we're getting closer and closer to at least running an experiment to see if that would be applicable and if it would work. So it's all exciting stuff to see. I know one of the biggest things that usually when things are pitched within Cardano, it's like there's very mixed reviews, but there was one done very recently for SNEC that seemed like it was overwhelmingly positive. Can you explain what they just executed or are currently executing?
Sure. So originally, SNEC actually submitted a proposal for 5 million ADA, and they were going to use those funds to, increase Cardano's transaction volume. Because Cardano is a decentralized network, all of the fees are split among all of the different stakers, right? So
Mm,
as you increase the transaction volume, you're increasing staking rewards for everyone, given that there's a lot of transactions there. So, they requested 5 million ADA, and, people didn't like the proposal. They felt that they didn't want to give that much money to, a meme coin, air quotes. So they kind of went back to the drawing book. It was marked unconstitutional as well, just because some of the formatting. But they, reproposed it as a loan. So they're essentially promising to pay back the 5 million ADA, I think, over the next 5 years. So people are really kind of a lot more happy about that one. because as governance evolves, I think what people want to see is kind of return back to the treasury,
Totally.
some ROI. So there's interest on top of it as well. So I think that that's
Nice.
why it's starting to be well received, is because the treasury's not just spending the money. They're loaning it out and earning some interest on top of it. And their hope is to increase Cardano's TVL, the on-chain transaction volume, and then get some bigger exchange listings. But I mean, they were already listed on Kraken and
Yes.
crypto.com, so they've been doing quite well and showing some business savviness getting listed there.
100%. And I can see why people are far more receptive to that. It seems like there's far less risk involved with everyone who's approving it. So makes total sense. Good on them for going back to the drawing board and figuring out a way to make it work. And I will say that I really believe in the Snack project. It seems like they also have a good team behind it. I don't know them personally, but it does seem like they're doing some really, really cool things. I think for Cardano to go where we want it to go, I think we need more mainstream names, at least to bring some people into the ecosystem, see that, wow, okay, this isn't a dead chain. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There's really cool things being built in here. There's really, really smart people building here. And I feel like Sneck can be one of the teams to do that. Are there any other teams that really come to mind that you feel, besides obviously yours, that come to mind in terms of how helping to spread just general adoption and awareness of the whole ecosystem?
Yeah, I think most teams are trying to do that.
Okay.
Because if you do well on Cardano, you reach a certain cap, and you
Yeah.
quickly realize that for our team to grow, for my business to grow, and for our users to grow, we have to kind of outsource that. We have to reach out to other blockchain ecosystems or regular people that haven't used the blockchain. So I think all of the teams on Cardano are trying to do that in some sense. What's nice about meme coins is it's not too much to understand, right?
Yes.
I really like liquid finance, and I also like Indigo, but bring that to a regular person, they're going to be like, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
So meme coins, I think meme coins and also layer one tokens like ADA are really easy for regular people because you just understand, it's like Bitcoin, or it's like it's something you buy and it may go up or it may go down. So but I do think most teams are trying to bring on new people.
Totally. Yeah, it's not something that's easy to do, especially I was thinking about this pretty deeply yesterday where during last bull market, like most people were stuck inside, and so they were picking up more hobbies, not eliminating them out of like being limited financially or having other stressors going on in their life. And now in this cycle, that it's people have before there was one major problem where everyone was dealing with COVID, and now it's like people feel like they have 40 different problems, and so our task of breaking through the noise and trying to get people educated is a very difficult ask because for a lot of people, this really intimidates them. And I think a lot of it has to do with how people see traditional finance, where it's kind of like, oh, we don't talk about that. We don't understand that. It's just what other people do. It's not what I do. And that
Hmm.
belief statement is really, really ingrained in people. I see that more and more. Even like it doesn't even matter which generation. I talk to my friends about this who aren't big crypto heads. I talk to my family, my grandparents, and their sentiment towards finances and understanding that is all the same. Like they don't even want to hear it, which is crazy to
Hmm.
me, but it makes our job so much harder. And I'm trying to think about how like how do we shift the messaging to make it more approachable? And I haven't really come to a good answer. Like, how are you guys approaching getting people involved with Atrium and getting them excited about something that isn't like sexy, you know what I mean? Like crypto, we love it obviously, we're obsessed with it, but like conventionally it's difficult to get them in that 0 to 10 if it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think at first there needs to be some need for it. Right. I think
Okay.
in a perfect world, unless you're kind of like a nerd and you like finances and you
Yeah.
like seeing the number go up, it's you don't really want it. I think there's a lot of people that would
True.
rather just have a financial advisor. Like he
Yes.
tells me when number goes up, he
Yeah.
tells me how much I'm allowed to
So
spend,
true. Yeah.
so it's like there has to be a need there, and I think the need is growth, focusing on your long-term outcome as an individual, and I think
Mm,
investing in the right cryptos is a good way to improve your long-term outcome as an individual. It's
totally.
just as easy to lose your money as well if you buy the wrong one, but the way that we're tackling it is first and foremost, I can pull it up here later too if we have time,
Yeah,
but
please.
we've tried to make Atrium sexy. That's the first thing. So when you
Love
you
that.
log into our platform, it's just really easy on the eyes. It's something that you want to kind of check back in on every day.
That
And we build
matters,
an
man. That matters
yeah,
so much. Go ahead.
yeah, we've built an education portal as well with 26 motion graphic videos that are bite size, 2 to 4 minutes, quick, so you can kind of
Amazing.
consume a few videos at a time, almost Duolingo-esque, where you're doing a little bit at a time and
Love that.
slowly moving forward. So that's really how we're trying to tackle it. But I think that need and interest, needs to be there for us to, really do well. And what I've seen in the past is, people they see the number go up a lot. They see Bitcoin reach an all-time high or
Yeah.
Cardano or Ethereum, and that's what opens their eyes to it, right? So we serve as that tool for people that have just heard about crypto from a friend, and their friend told them a little bit, but you just share them atrium.io. And they can kind of go on that journey themselves, and the education lives within the app too. So that's kind of how we're going about it, is just trying to, have a platform that's ready to educate people, as that need and interest arises again. And I think it's starting to.
I totally agree. Well, if you have the platform up and running, do you want to share it with us now?
Yeah, I can do that. So this platform's already live on Cardano mainnet. We've been working on it for over 2.5 years now, and really the one of the main goals was just to make crypto easy for people, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
So
totally makes sense.
so let's do my entire screen here. So, one thing that we're going to be adding in the future is the ability just to connect with Google. I think
Mm,
that wallets are pretty hard for people. You have to store the mnemonic phrase somewhere. And I think the direction that we're all heading is, more savvy people have wallets, but, you'll just be able to click log in with Google or Facebook or whatever. And they'll, what they do is they kind of shard the keys out so it's still secure. So this is the education portal here. We've got a bunch of motion graphic videos that teach you how to protect yourself, hardware wallets, stuff like that. And once you actually connect your wallet, you see this pretty dashboard pop up. And we've tried to gamify this experience as well. And if I go to this community tab here, we have this whole leveling system baked in. Let me make sure I got the right wallet connected here.
this looks super clean, man.
Thanks. Yeah, let me make sure I got the right wallet pulled up. But
Yeah,
we've
yeah, no
also
worries.
tried to gamify the experience as well. So, as you're using the application, you're earning XP just like a video game as well. So as you engage with Cardano content online, or use the Cardano blockchain itself, you're earning this XP that levels you up in the platform. So, a lot of people nowadays, they play video games on their phones, and they kind of feel at home in leveling system and experiences. So we added that in there as well. And I think I actually have the right wallet pulled up now.
Sweet. And so you said
So
you guys were working on this for 2.5 years. That's a lot of work, man. That's amazing.
yeah, we've launched an open source multiple smart contracts now, and that took a lot of the time, and the
Mm,
design and the animation. So, this is the leveling system that I was talking about
that's
here.
sweet, man.
So as you use the Cardano blockchain, you level up this NFT here, and you're unlocking new backgrounds and new avatars. As you're engaging with your favorite companies on X or on Discord, you're earning XP, and people love this so far. We have almost 1,000 people that have been playing around with this. And this is kind of the XP leaderboard here. You can see I'm 31st on it, but there's a bunch of
That's
people leveling
awesome.
up and grinding and ultimately using the Cardano blockchain. So that's this right here. It's an evolution of Web 2 accounts. If you have an X account with a bunch of followers and you're making some money on it, and you say something that somebody doesn't like, you can have your account removed. Whereas the evolution here is it's a Web 3 profile. So when you mint this, the account serves as an NFT in your wallet, and then there's another NFT that lives in the smart contract, and that has your user data. So if you want to
Mm,
go edit, your account, you use this one as a key, and only you can edit your user data. So we can't take your account from you. We can't
that's
change
awesome.
your user data. So that's kind of the evolution of Web 2. And then on Cardano, instead of running, a blockchain miner, this loud and heavy and, hot computer devices, you stake to stake pools and you earn a yield from that. So we've also launched another smart contract that allows you to delegate to 50 different Cardano stake pools at the same time. So you're supporting 50 businesses at the same time. You're earning ADA plus ATMA tokens on top of your rewards. We launched this about 3 or 4 weeks ago. We have about 440,000 ADA in there so far as TVL, so it's moving along quite nicely, and that's
That's
being split
amazing.
up to, all of these different SPOs here. And we're also trying to serve as just the hub, so you can look at the different prices of tokens that you may have as well. We have wallet features in here, so you can send and receive. And so yeah, that's what we've launched so far. The education portal, the dashboard, two different smart contracts, and we're really trying to build a blockchain focused social platform here. We're not trying to reinvent X or Discord or anything, but build, blockchain focused social features for the people that are ultimately here now.
Man, I think this is so important. You guys did an awesome job here. This looks so dope. And the fact that you, you're thinking about the whole experience, where I think that's one of the biggest things that people struggle with is they don't know where to start. And this kind of gives you that perfect starting point, that like kickoff point where you can actually start to understand and then also take things to a deeper level all from one place, because you're dead right, like are very confusing to people, like the whole concept, everything's very confusing and they don't know where to go. And unfortunately, because the interest went away in crypto, some of the most of the creators stopped making genuinely educational content, and now they just chase price predictions all the time. So there's not even reliable information that's pushed in front of people very consistently. So having a hub like this where it's all good information, so valuable. So where can people access this? And do they have to pay for it? Like, is it free? How does it all work?
So you just go to atrium.io and it's free to access. You do have to have a wallet right now to connect. We're going to try to
Okay,
move away from that. So you can set up a wallet in Eternal, Yoroi, or Lace, and then you can log in. All of the education in the platform is free.
amazing.
Using the platform is free. Using the staking baskets feature I mentioned is free. There is a mint price to get one of the profiles and start leveling up. And that profile also acts as your identity. So
Hmm.
you can, if you minted one for, at Ben, for example, I could send you 10 ADA in the platform by typing in at Ben as well. So that
That's
does
wicked.
cost some assets, but
Yeah, yeah.
everything else is free to use.
Sweet, man. All right, that's linked down below, so definitely everyone go check that out. Especially if you already have a wallet, go sign up quickly. If not, it's worth making one just to get in there and just learn. I can't stress how important it is to learn, especially when markets start to move. The winners are typically the people who are the most educated. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of great resources, but people like Peyton are actually building resources to make this easier for you. Believe that it's there, go use it, take advantage. So now we talked about, I mentioned briefly how a lot of creators, they focus purely on price. And a lot of that's because obviously it's fun. When you see the number go up, it's fun to talk about.
Hmm.
Do you feel like we are approaching a good time for the price of Cardano? Like, do you envision over the next 6 to 12 months some major things happening? Where do you see the price going?
Yeah, it seems that way to me. If you look at Ethereum, Ethereum just crossed, an all-time high recently, and the cycles tend to repeat themselves in a way,
Hmm.
not exactly, but they rhyme. And what I've seen in the past is, Bitcoin hits an all-time high and then it takes quite a while. It trades sideways for a long time. It does some price discovery. And then eventually some of that money starts to flow into ETH, right? And then ETH marks an all-time high, but ETH hasn't really ran yet like
No.
Bitcoin did. It hit the all-time high and then kind of came back down, but I would be shocked, to not see it do that again and then continue past 5 and 6 and even maybe 7,000. And what then happens is a lot of that money starts to cycle into, kind of the quality layer ones. I would say Cardano, Solana, Sui, Algorand, and I think that we'll see some new price highs eventually with those other layer ones. And we also have the Federal Reserve is planning on lowering interest rates this month. I think we saw like a 90% chance of them doing that. So
Yeah.
that's going to make capital a bit cheaper in the market, and that usually tends to kind of flow into more risk on assets. And crypto is pretty risk on. So, over the next 6 to 12 months, I do see some quality layer ones kind of rising in price after, ETH's all-time high. And that's also when we'll get a rush of new people and new users,
Yes.
because it's like, I've seen a picture in the past of like, someone having fun and they were like rolling down a hill and they're like the first innovator, and then one guy joins them and then eventually everybody's rolling
Everyone.
down the hill. It's the same thing with crypto.
Totally.
Everybody kind of comes in at the worst time when the prices are too high,
Yep.
and it pays to be educated, but it also kind of pays to be early. So, my mantra with people is, if you're a regular person, it's hard to have enough capital to get into crypto for it to have a meaningful effect on your life. So
Mhm.
what you have to do is invest slowly over time into some of the safer cryptocurrency assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and have a longer timeline of say 4 to 5 years where you're taking a small piece of your paycheck and investing it just like a 401k into a few different, layer 1 blockchains, a few different assets. And because over a span of 4 or 5 years, that's usually how long these cycles take, you can actually build up a sizable amount of investment. Whereas, most people, you're not going to be able to invest too much just off of one paycheck that's coming next week, for example. So
Totally.
it kind of pays. It's just like real estate and the stock market, of where time in the market matters, especially if you're getting the right assets.
Yeah, it's true. It's tried and true advice, but people don't typically follow it. And I think a lot of people are very jaded on crypto in general because they didn't really understand it, and either they lost a lot of money or they were up a lot of money and then it all went down. So they think the whole thing was a Ponzi scheme, and that's what it was. And I saw
Hmm.
so many of my friends that because this will be my third cycle, second that I've actively participated in, and the other one I just kind of watched because I had $0. But
Yeah.
and I saw that there were so many of my friends in the last cycle that were temporarily as interested as I was, but they didn't stick with it. And I think a lot of that had to do with just it was a lot more difficult to really grasp. There wasn't ChatGPT. There wasn't people like you pumping out content super consistently. There wasn't a platform like Atrium, but that stuff exists now. And if you do actually just take the patience approach, like, if you look at the numbers of of the kind of returns that crypto has gotten over like a cycle long period, like you mentioned, the numbers can be insane if you approach them from a way where it's not being crazy. I think a lot of people come in, they throw it all on black, like they're at the roulette table and they throw it all on black or whatever, and then they lose, and then they're like, "Oh, this thing's a scam." It's like, no, the strategy was just not there. So I think that's amazing that there's some people now finally, hopefully, giving people some solid advice that will make for better decisions. So you
Yeah, it's
mentioned
it's
pick
not easy.
so
I
hard.
mean,
It's so
the
hard.
last 4 or 5 years have been kind of, rough as a cryptocurrency holder. It's been trading sideways for so long, and you know,
I've been getting roasted every week, man. Like for the last 4 years, everyone's been texting me being like, "Oh, crypto's not looking too good. Crypto's not looking too good." It's something strange about people that they like to do that, pile on when things aren't going well. And I just said, "Okay, we'll see, we'll see, we'll see." And I believe in the technology, and I think anybody who has delivered really good returns for themselves is because they had conviction when few others did. If everyone had conviction in something that you have conviction in, the opportunity wouldn't actually be as good as it is. So I think a lot of people, when they do find something, they don't even commit because they're like, oh, well, I need to hear it from 400 other people that this is a good decision before I'll do it. And then if you do that, the opportunity is gone. So for teaching people how to figure out what makes sense for them, because you mentioned buying the safer projects, what designates a project as safer?
that's a great question. And to be honest, I personally have lost, I wouldn't say I've lost, but I could have made more money this cycle because my categorization is a bit more strong, than other people's. For me, I look at how long has the blockchain been up, you know, like how long has it existed without crashing or going down, and if you look at Solana, for example, people that invested in Solana, they've made a lot of money, right? So this categorization maybe isn't the most efficient because the blockchain has kind of stopped. It's went down, I think 17, 18 times now, right? But for me personally, I look at how long has it been alive? Yeah, that's the first thing. Is there like a community of people that are building on it, that use the blockchain, that are kind of bringing it to the forefront of like real world services and, RWAs and stuff like that. So, you know, I do not like new things. You know, if
Okay.
there's a new blockchain that just came out or a new token, I think it's even higher of a chance that you're going to kind of lose your money, right? So, you know, to me, there's not very many blockchains that I would invest in over a 4 or 5 year timeline. You know, I would be looking at, you know, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, Cardano, you know, Sui, Algorand. You know, you know, Sui's a bit newer, you know, but
Mhm.
it seems like the Solana crowd really likes it. So, you know, if your friend, you know, from down the road's launching a new token or a blockchain, I wouldn't buy it, you know, that sort of thing. So something that's been around for a while, you know, it's just like investing in stocks, you know, there's blue chip stocks, you know, like Apple or Microsoft or Nvidia, for example. So it's the same thing here in crypto. You know, if you're doing the longer term horizon, you know, I think the best 401k of crypto is ultimately, you know, Bitcoin. And then, you know, if you look at the top 20, you can almost look at it like a risk curve. You
Mm.
know, the 20th one is likely going to be the riskiest, but there could be some more upside with that, you know, relative to Bitcoin. So that's why it's kind of good to diversify a little bit. And when you're first coming in, you know, you're not going to have any idea, you know, what you're doing. So it's best to just, you know, take $100 and buy 5 different ones. You know, you're not going to become a millionaire off of that, but as you slowly put in that 100 every week or, you know, every day, whatever works for you, you're going to slowly keep learning more from content creators, from platforms, from developers to kind of fine tune, you know, what the DCA strategy and the kind of diversification that you have. But yeah, I would, you know, look at how long it's been alive, you know, the technology, you know, what you can do with it, and then, you know, are there people using it, you know, or is there a community of people there that care about it and are keep, you know, working on it ultimately.
Totally. And everything you mentioned there is the exact same way that you should look at even just traditional investments, right? Like how many people are banking on this thing being successful? How many people are
Yeah.
incentivized by the success of this thing working out? And so the further you go down the risk profile, or I guess higher, depending how you're looking at it, that all these things should be a little more obvious that it's risky, right? Just like Peyton, like you said, like if it's new, there's a higher degree of chance that it's not going to work out. I actually, for fun, last night I went and watched crypto videos from 4 or 5 years ago, like when it was peak euphoria, and it was so interesting to see just the sheer volume of projects that are now literally worth nothing that were all over social media at the time. And so I also think it's very important for you to find a source that is a source of inspiration of yourself where you believe your own research and don't just copy what everyone's listening to, because
Yeah.
when the money does come back to this space, unfortunately the loudest voices are probably going to be the most ignorant. And so if you just follow the herd, if you're good at short-term timing, you might be one of the lucky few that makes money, but almost all of you will lose everything. And I felt for that very deeply the last cycle, because this was the first one I was actively involved in with real money at stake. For me, it was real money. And you learn the hard way, but the benefit is that you don't have to, if you just listen to the not exciting stuff, right? Like if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And if you think that you understand crypto better than people who have been here for like 15 years because you've made some money, like that's a massive red flag that you should probably slow your roll and realize that it's just the timing. Because any idiot can make really good money in a good market, but
Hmm.
you think you're the smart one when the money's going up. And I felt that too. I felt like I was the king like four
Yeah.
years ago, because I turned a tiny bit of money into what was a lot of money for me, and I just got drunk on it all and I wrote it all the way back down. So how
Hmm.
can people, so like if they listen to you over the next 6 to 12 months, they're going to make money. How do they decide when to sell? Because that's one of the hardest things that people have within crypto, is actually selling part of their bags, because there's an emotional part of it too.
Yeah. I mean, for me, you know, the first time that I ever started kind of selling, I just had this feeling of I kind of don't deserve this.
Really?
Yeah, like it just because, you know, it goes up so much that
Yeah.
you have this kind of internal feeling of like,
That's an
okay, what
awesome
does a
problem to
normal
have.
job pay
Yeah.
you? You know, well, this is let's say it's a, you know, 2 week salary or whatever, and you only put in 100, $200. You know,
But I
did
think you deserve that, man, because sorry to cut you off, man, but I think that's part of understanding the game that we're currently in within capitalism, right? Like those that
yeah.
take on the most risk and have done the research, they get rewarded. So,
That's
sorry,
true. But
continue with your story, but I think you
I just
deserve it.
mean like there's like a feeling that you almost have
Totally
of
get it.
like, you know, you
Because
do
you're a
have
good
this,
person.
yeah, there's this feeling of like this is too much. And if you ever feel
Yes.
like that, take it out. you
Yeah,
know?
okay. That's an
Um,
awesome rule.
the other thing that I personally do is I DCA out the same way that
Okay.
I DCA in,
Love
because
that.
you always have this feeling of like, oh, I'm a genius. Everything I buy is going up because we're in this euphoria stage.
Yeah,
Take some out in the same way that you put some in because of crypto culture is very community based and oriented. And as
totally.
you start to meet friends, you start to like, you meet your little crowd of geniuses and it's easy to kind of buy into that hype
Yes.
in a way and not sell and kind of follow it all the way down,
That's so
so
good.
I think I would, sell 10% if it's gone up crazy. You've been doing this 4 or 5 year thing and you're on year
Yeah,
4, year 5, and you've really done well. Start taking some out every single week, every day, because it happens very quickly too.
totally.
If you could literally like, go out with some friends and, have a few drinks and wake up the next morning and you miss the top. You know what I mean? So it's important to slowly DCA out in the same way that you DCA'd in. And if you're ever looking at an amount that's like, wow, that's quite a bit, that would meaningfully
Sell
affect
some.
my life, sell
Yes.
it and
Yes.
meaningfully affect your life because I would imagine that, only 10% of the people, maybe even less actually, pull it out, at a reasonable time and they're up. And it's because they kind of hold on to it, too long.
I made that exact same mistake, and so if you're new to crypto and you're still watching this, Peyton's giving really, really good advice here, but the problem with really good advice is you typically don't realize it's good until you've actually made the mistake yourself.
Yeah.
So
Which I
please, like,
did.
feel yes, me too. So feel the conviction in our voice here to like just please take our advice, sell some. You're gonna be so happy that you did. I felt like such an idiot when I wrote it because it does happen that fast. And the scariest part is when stuff starts to really pick up here and we're in peak euphoria, there's constant little pullbacks. And so you always just think like this is just one of those. It's gonna come right back up. I'm not selling now. I'm not an idiot. And then eventually it doesn't come back. And then it
Hmm.
just all keeps going down and down and down. And that's what happened to my portfolio. So that's phenomenal advice, honestly.
Yeah. Two kind of like little stories about that. I mean, when
Yeah,
I
please.
found crypto, I was 17 and I didn't have much money. I had like $300 in, and that $300 turned into 11,000.
Let's
And I
go.
was just shocked. I was like,
You must have been over the moon.
yeah, so I took out a grand and was like, "You know what? I'm gonna buy myself a nice computer."
Let's
And,
go.
I left the rest in. I watched it go from 10K left back down to the 400 that I originally had in. One of my buddies, he put $10,000 into, this coin from his local town, which was
No
the other thing I
way.
said, "Don't do that."
That's
Um,
crazy.
but his 10K went up to like 600,000. So he calls me, on the phone. He's like, "Dude, you wouldn't believe it. I've got $600,000 in this token, and it was called Karma Coin. You could go look it up, but they would give out like a free car every week or something or every month." And I said, "Dude, you need to sell all of that now." And he goes, I can't. He's like, "It's gonna go to 1 million, I said, "Dude," I said, "just sell it. Trust me." He's like, "No, I'm not gonna do it." I said, "Okay, take out 20%." I was like, "Then you got 120K, you got the rest riding." And, he didn't. So he watched
No.
that 600K go from 600 down to literally zero because the
No.
token wasn't worth anything. And, you kind of have to live that a little bit
You do.
to experience that, unless you're someone that's good at taking advice. I'm personally not very good at it. I have to touch the stove a little bit to take advice.
Yeah, I think everyone always thinks they're decent at taking advice until they're forced to face an opportunity like that. And then
Mhm.
they typically see that they're not only in retrospect. I had a very similar experience. About 3 Ethereum at around $200, and then I caught the NFT craze. So I was flipping some NFTs, and I picked some of the right ones. I could say it was skill, and I think part of it was skill in terms of following the herd, but also it was just craziness. Like it was also just madness, and I also caught some of the initial wave of like coins blowing up, like SafeMoon as part of that. I made some profits that I later then lost, but I was in there with a lot of people, and people do really start to drink the Kool-Aid. Like they really, really do, much like your friend who, if you were to explain that concept to anyone else, they'd obviously see like, that's crazy, buddy, sell it. Like that's absolutely insane. But when you're in it and you've made so much, there's so much to the emotional and psychological part of it where you're now wrapped up in the aspect of like, this made me a winner. Right. And so, like, that's
Mhm.
kind of a very scary thing where people start to hold on to that so deeply where they don't feel like they're selling it. They get too attached to what the numbers mean and they don't realize that they're just numbers. And so, if you do that, it's a very dangerous game you're playing where you will almost 100% lose because you can't get too emotionally attached to this stuff. And another great piece of advice that I want to underline that you gave was if you're new, it still is worth going to buy like 4 or 5 different projects at one time, even if you only have $100. And I think why that's so important is because you're going to see that there are geniuses that are equally passionate about all of these projects, and they're all claiming they're going to have the same kind of success, which is impossible. They can't all have that kind of success. And so until you see enough of these people, if you only have one, you're going to think they're right. And you're going to really believe they're right. And in the short term, they're going to make you money. And then you're going to believe them even more. And that's when things get really dangerous and you can lose a lot of money very fast.
Yeah. And you have to kind of have different timelines for your investments as well, right? I
Yes.
mean, looking at Bitcoin, for example, if you bought some Bitcoin early on and it went up quite a bit, there's going to be a lot of people telling you, hey, I'm never selling my Bitcoin. I'm going to use this to retire.
Yeah.
Whereas where you're at and kind of your financial outlook or, how much money you have, your net worth, it may make sense for you to sell that Bitcoin, right?
Yes.
Whereas other people, it may make sense for them just they're on a 10 or a 20-year time horizon, whereas you're not, right? And I think Bitcoin is fair to give it the 10 or 20-year time horizon, but a lot of these other, altcoins, I would say, no greater than that 4 to 5 year timeline because tech comes and goes ultimately.
Totally. Yeah, and people have a hard time justifying or understanding that too. When I explained that some of my highest conviction plays, I'll even say I don't really want to hold this for 10 years, but I have conviction over it for the next, let's say, 3 to 4. I think the narratives can be attached to it and they can do enough where even if they don't win, because I always give the .com analogy where there's a lot of people who made life-changing money through the .com boom even picking the losers, right? Because you only know the losers were losers when you look back at it. And there's a lot of people who left the table with life changing money. Like, let's look at even Mark Cuban. Like, this guy's seen around the world as like a universal success when his company, like, it got sold for a lot of money, but it didn't do a lot of in terms of providing value after it was sold. But yet he's still seen as this massive success. Like, that could be you. You know what I mean? Like, even if you don't pick a winner, as long as you understand your time horizons, I think that's where a lot of people get stuck is that they don't get educated enough in terms of what each thing means so that they should approach it differently. 'Cause I think a lot of people, it's like, oh, Bitcoin or nothing. But it's like, no, Bitcoin should be part of your strategy and have a different relationship to the other elements of your strategy and realize that they're all feeding off of each other. And eventually, this is really about impacting your life. So you've said it like 3 or 4 times now, but if it's going to change your life, let it change your life because it
Yeah.
can change tomorrow. Like these fake numbers on a
Where
screen
it
can go
won't.
down. Yes. Yes. It is what it is, man. It's crazy, but I'm excited for the upcoming craziness. I agree with you. I think when they start to cut rates, I do think things will go a little crazy. And I've seen firsthand because I've been studying social for the last 6 or 7 years. You just need a bit of sustained price movement to get enough people really excited for it to start being everywhere. And then you see streamers starting to talk about it, and then it reaches the general zeitgeist, and it can snowball very, very quickly, especially with ChatGPT. I think that's gonna be the catalyst that really makes this go because before the you and I came to the conclusion through our own research that this stuff was all very obvious. And I think anybody who spends enough time, it's like, okay, yeah, most of these won't win, but the technology itself is like a no-brainer. Yes, we need this stuff. So now there's just such an easier route to that clarification that that's going to make it happen very quickly. And then also the legal stuff, like when people's money guy are calling to be like, oh, we need to buy some crypto, like that changes the situation completely, which I'm
Mhm.
super excited for. I'm I'm a big believer in the Cardano ecosystem. Obviously, we're talking about it. That's how I found you initially. But a lot of people call it like a dead chain. Nothing's being built on it, and the Cardano native tokens or assets are kind of really unknown. Do
Mhm.
you see that changing with the price movement that Cardano will experience? Do you think the Cardano native tokens will experience a similar level up or a higher level up? How do you see that going?
Yeah, so another great question. Getting back to that kind of cycle thing I was talking about earlier,
Yeah.
a lot of like Ethereum investors, they're not like Bitcoin investors. Same thing with Solana. I would almost call them kind of fair weather friends.
Mm-hmm.
They're all looking for the next thing that's
Very
going to
good point.
run up, right? So I do see Cardano kind of following, in this cycle. I think the Cardano, native assets as well, some of them like the blue chips on Cardano will do quite well as, you know, with that. And it's because, people are just going to be looking for the next blockchain to kind of run up and make some money off of during this crazy cycle. There is, a lot of activity on Cardano, and the reason why Solana's kind of stood out more than Cardano is for a few reasons. The first one is, they do a lot to kind of fake their numbers, right?
Mm,
Because you have such small transaction fees, you can do, million here, million there, million here, million there, and it looks like a huge amount of volume when you compare it to other layer ones. And I will say that Solana does have more volume, but they've kind of used, fake numbers to really drive that up and bring themselves to kind of the forefront there. Um, no, and I think that, what Cardano has is real numbers, and it's like a real budding blockchain community. The second big thing that Solana had was an endless amount of capital, to give to people that are building there, right? And they kind of gave it out willy-nilly. They would just, if you're, you have a company that can build something, we'll give you a shot. Whereas, Cardano didn't have that ability, and now it does with the launch of the new governance feature that we just mentioned. There's about, I want to say about 1.4 billion ADA in the treasury, which is over $1 billion that can be used to fund, development directly on chain. And because that number is so high, I think that almost any, company, any builder or any business would be willing to build on Cardano, especially if some of that development is being subsidized directly by the treasury. I mean, for example, Draper, through the Draper University program, he brought a bunch of Cardano developers out there and kind of taught them, how to, better be business operators. Techstars, which is who helped launch Uber and DigitalOcean, they had a
wow.
catalyst proposal that was funded for them to kind of teach businesses how to be better and for them to help invest and launch in businesses. So I think that, just the sheer amount of capital that the Cardano blockchain has now that can actually be deployed is really going to expedite the growth of Cardano in the same way that Solana deployed that capital very quickly, right? So you're kind of looking at the trade-offs between centralization and decentralization. With Solana, they can move fast, they can give people money quicker, whereas with Cardano, because it's decentralized, it happens slowly, but there is other trade-offs that Cardano gets with that. For example, there's this bill that's moving through the government right now, the US government, and it's called the Genius Act. And what the Genius Act looks at is the number of stakeholders that actually have a say in the governance on the blockchain. And it actually ranks blockchains based on decentralization. And if you meet certain aspects, then you are automatically considered a commodity instead of a security. And if you take that act that hasn't passed yet, I think it's likely that it would pass, and you run it through, an AI and say, okay, read this act and then now tell me which blockchains you think are meaningfully decentralized. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Cardano stands out at the top of that because they actually do have that decentralization, right? So I think when it comes to, high assurance, industries and, governments, I think that they're not going to really look at, these numbers that we think are important in crypto, like TVL and volume. They're going to be more worried about high assurance code and decentralization, who's running this thing. So, we're really looking at two different trade-offs here. And that's why I think it's good to, split investments up, because if you bet on the different trade-offs, it's a bit harder to, ultimately, I think lose. And if you look at the top, 15 different blockchains, they're all different blockchains with a different set of tools and a different set of trade-offs that are going to be attractive to some businesses and not be attractive to others. So for Cardano, because everything's, it has a unique smart contract language, that has higher assurance code. It's, written in Haskell, which has made it harder for developers, at first, but it allows them to build, code that can't be hacked as easily. as it is on Ethereum. And, there's been billions and billions and billions lost, through smart contract hacks. So I think as we head towards this emergence of crypto kind of, uh, coming into traditional finance, like I think it's obvious to me that, not all of these, in institutions are going to pick, just the one that's fast or shiny. They're going to be picking the ones that, have high assurance code.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point because I think a lot of people fall for the trap of thinking that everyone would approach the decision making like they would. And why I picked Cardano like a long time ago for my highest conviction play was I think the people that are making the most decisions here at the grandest scale will really be attracted to the approach that was taken to build this infrastructure and technology. And that'll mean a lot to them. If you haven't met really rich people or really successful people, like they don't really take risk because they don't have to. And so I think a lot of times we as retail people who are very much on the plane of we need to take risk to get out of the situation or we have a dream situation we want in mind, a lot of the people making these decisions, that's not the reality for them. And they have a lot to lose in terms of reputation, finances, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're going to want something that is more tried, true, tested, decentralized, that diminishes their own personal risk for being the one that gave it the stamp of approval. And that's really why I believed in Cardano so much. So let's speculate for fun here. Like, if like someone were to come to you and said, "What's your peak price prediction for Cardano during when things pick up? Give me a range. Where do you think it could go to?"
Um, I would probably say maybe $6 to $9.
6 to 9. Nice.
I it always goes up a bit more than I expect.
Yeah,
To be honest, I wasn't expecting $3 in the last run.
you weren't.
This no, I I just thought it going back up to $2 would have been the craziest thing in the entire world because it fell
Okay,
all the way down to 2 cents, after
which
the
is
COVID
insane.
crash.
Yeah,
The idea of it going from 2 cents to $2 was just insane to me because that's a
that is crazy.
100x, right? So this cycle, our bottom was around, 25 cents. So I think, $4 to $5 is kind of, a bit more obvious in my head. And then because it usually goes a little higher than I expect, maybe 6 to 7.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, my upper range I'd say was going to be around $10 in like a really good scenario. So I
Hmm.
don't think we're too far off base there. I think that anything can happen too, though. I will say that. I also think that it sounds stupid, but Charles's recent support for Kraju, like I think that actually is very bullish for the ecosystem at large. And I love the sentiment of making it more fun because that does matter. I think that he's at least aware of how retail people see Cardano right now and how we can kind of change that narrative a little bit. And I'm hopeful that a lot of those things happen. But for Cardano native tokens, we touched on those briefly. You mentioned some of the blue chips on there. What projects would you refer to as the blue chips on Cardano?
Indigo, for sure. Liquid finance is another one that really stands out to me. I mean, I don't know too much about the tokenomics, so I wouldn't say like this is a good buy per se, but
Hmm.
MinSwap is definitely a blue chip, without knowing too much about their tokenomics. They've had, essentially most of the volume,
Yep.
on Cardano through MinSwap. And then I would say, SNEC as well, is I think an obvious blue chip. Moving past that, World Mobile Token, they've kind of gone cross-chain recently, but I'd still consider them a Cardano blue chip. Yeah, and maybe IAG as well, Iagon, and I would cut it there.
Cool. And if anyone's new to Cardano, they typically find Charles eventually, the founder of it. What when you picked Cardano in the ecosystem, was it the tech? Was it Charles? Was it a combination of everything? Like, what was it that attracted you to pretty well stake your claim that like this is where I'm gonna be and this is where I'm gonna put my time? Because that's a big decision. You've, you've put a lot of time and effort into this ecosystem. So I'm just curious, what was it that attracted you to it in the first place, and then gave you the conviction to say I'm gonna build here? Because that's not a small thing.
Yeah. Well, I would say it was two separate things. So the initial, oh, I'm gonna kind of check out this blockchain was
Yeah.
just how cheap it was. I had
Okay.
no
Yeah.
knowledge of crypto at the time,
Love
so
that.
Bitcoin was like thousands of dollars, and I'm like, well, I don't have thousands of dollars. This one's only, 9 pennies,
Yeah, I'm
and
gonna
I can
buy some.
acquire a lot more there.
Yeah.
Once you get more into crypto and you know basic math, you realize that different blockchains have different amounts of tokens. So a 10-cent token on one chain can be an 1,000 dollar token on another if that second one has less supply, right? So I didn't know that yet. I was young and dumb. Then after that, I would say what really created that conviction for me was, looking at Bitcoin and Ethereum at the time. You had to have a significant amount of money to participate in the network or have any meaningfully effect or affect on the network. So I needed, a $50 million to become a big Bitcoin miner, or I
Yeah.
needed, $5 million to become a big Ethereum miner. Whereas Cardano, because it was brand new, I realized that I could have, a say in this system, if I contributed to it early on. Right. So, just the idea of proof of stake, moving away from these power hungry miners that are solving useless problems and removing the useless problems out of it and having the individuals there determine who processes their transactions was really attractive to me. So just, proof of stake is kind of what bought me in early on. And, I paid attention for quite a while. Before I started building, it'd been maybe 3 or 4 years of me holding ADA. And I watched the way, uh, you know, the founding entities operated, and I felt that it was a bit more trustworthy than other kind of founding entities that I'd seen in the space. So it was kind of a mix of the fact that it was a new blockchain with a new technology that was a different set of trade-offs than the existing technologies, mixed with um, the fact that I felt that I could have an impact if I tried, right? So, and then also the integrity of what I saw to be the founding entities at the time. I'm like, oh well, I trust these guys, at least before we've entered this trustless era on Cardano.
Totally. Yeah, no, it totally makes sense, and some great advice packed in there where I always go to the saying of you have 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. You should listen twice as much as you talk. And I definitely took that same philosophy for crypto. Like, I didn't start talking about crypto on the internet until I had consumed like 5+ years of content and learning all the different times and being a bystander before I felt like I could have anything too constructive to say. Then once I did understand things, and there's a lot of value in just learning and being around, and osmosis is a pretty powerful thing where you start to make better decisions like that. So totally makes sense. I think that a lot of people should take that kind of longer term approach. Very few people do, but if you're still watching this video, you probably will. So let's give some advice to people who are starting today. So like you years ago, but today, what advice do you give them to start navigating the waters of crypto?
Yeah. So if you're brand new to crypto, before even learning anything, I would just take $100 and throw it into 5 different assets because you
Which
you
five
start
would you
to
pick?
Um, I would say Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, Cardano, and
Suey?
yeah, Sui or Algorand, one or the other, or actually AVAX too.
AVAX. Okay.
Um, I don't know. I have been buying AVAX lately over the past few
Cool.
months, personally, but because then you have an incentive to kind of learn more. You have a little bit
Yes.
of stake, you have a little bit of cash. Um, And then I would just say, kind of develop, a DCA strategy, something that's not going to break your bank or, ruin your daily life, but, that you can just start, investing, over the next, 6 months or 5 years, whatever makes sense to you, and just stick to it. And then, you may lose a little bit of money, you make a little bit of money, but you're going to start to learn how to, be an investor, both in crypto and I think in the stock market. And then find some people, that you can trust. It's really hard to say that because a lot of content creators are kind of paid.
Yes.
They release a lot of, bullshit and they kind of pump their own bags, but you do have to find some people that you trust in this space so you can kind of stay up to date, with everything. If they're Cardano focused, I would tell them to use atrium.io to kind of learn more. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a long road, It's going to take you some time. Coinbase, they have like a little learn to earn platform. I think that's a good start. You're getting like a free $10 or whatever for learning about crypto. And just take it slow. Don't just drop 10K all in at once as soon as you hear something, and you know, just slowly kind of learn about the space, and find people you can trust.
Totally. You can't fake conviction, and conviction comes through time under tension, learning different things, and getting exposure to all of this different stuff. And a lot of people, I think, they have a bad relationship with learning because the only time they learned was through school, and they were learning things they didn't care about. And they also feel like there's not a good ROI on learning, but we're still
Mhm.
very early in crypto. Like, if you do learn, there's so many different pockets to change your life, and even if it could be discovering friends, it could be discovering an employment opportunity that's not even technical, right? That this ecosystem is going to continue to grow. Cardano for one, but just crypto in general, and there's so many roles that are going to be soon be created where if you even know a little bit about the space, you're going to stand out in an interview or when an opportunity comes up, and that could change your life completely. So, great advice. You mentioned AVAX before we wrap up here. Why have you been buying AVAX as of late? I'd love to hear your thesis on that.
Um, just because ETH hit an all-time high, and I was kind of expecting it to hit an all-time high, and
Yeah.
I'm very, I give the advice of DCA to a lot of people, but I don't follow it very well, to be
It's hard to
honest.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Cardano maxi, to be
Yeah.
honest. So I've been trying to kind of expand my horizons a little bit. I like AVAX because they're also kind of focusing on privacy, which is the direction that Midnight's taking.
Yes.
Um, and it's a fast, quicker version of Ethereum with a solid team behind it. So
Can you explain Midnight to people
yeah,
watching?
yeah. So Midnight is a new blockchain that Charles Hoskinson's launching. And if you already have some ADA or some Cardano or some Bitcoin or some XRP, I think there's 8 different blockchains, you're going to get a piece of the token for free. So you're going to have ownership in this new network that's launching by somebody who's co-founded Ethereum and Cardano and done quite well. You will essentially get a free piece of that. And it's a really unique blockchain. I do think that the design is quite revolutionary. And, if you look at traditional blockchains, if I wanted to go send Ben here some money, I have to, send him some ADA, and then I have to pay for the transaction in ADA. If you're not paying for, Microsoft Word with Microsoft stock, so you almost have like a disincentive to use the blockchain because you're spending your investment to use the blockchain. So Midnight, it has a dual tokenomics model. There's two tokens. One's called Night, one's called Dust. Your Night token actually generates dust, and then you can use the dust to use the network. So instead of having to use the investment that you have to use the network, you're actually just using this decaying resource. So you're in a way, because the resource is decaying, you're incentivized to use the blockchain rather than to not use it, right? So, which I think is an interesting kind of tokenomics model. And then what it offers is privacy. We've had privacy before in crypto before with Monero, for example, but because Monero is completely private, nation states hated it. It was banned. It was removed from exchanges. They recently just had a 51% attack, which wasn't good. Um, so with Midnight, you have the option to disclose. So, you in crypto, a wallet is like a pair of keys and you sign something. Well, on Midnight, you can sign to disclose. So you have the ability, for me to send Bob or Jerry $10 without them knowing how much money I actually have. And nobody wants someone to know how much money that you have or what your trading is or your gambling habit. Nobody wants that, right?
Very
So
true. Yeah.
I think it's an easy sell to regular people because everybody understands the needs of privacy, especially when it comes to finances. So you have, a private blockchain that's also legal, um, which I think is a good mix because Monero didn't work out because it could be used to, buy drugs or do bad things. Whereas with Midnight, because you have that option to disclose, you have privacy, but you also have compliance. Right. So it's a merge of those two things, which I think is real clever. I think the airdrop is very clever too. Onboarding a bunch of new users through a big airdrop, I think is a good thing.
Totally. And how do you see that impacting Cardano as an ecosystem? Like, do you see that changing how things are viewed? Do you see that bringing on a lot of people? How do you see it
It
going?
it already has started to. Um, because, Cardano has had kind of the ghost chain narrative that you mentioned
Yes.
in the past.
Yeah.
So because, Charles has been able to go to some of these entities with Midnight and, this new idea, it doesn't have that baggage that Cardano has. So he's secured deals with, blockchain.com, with Brave as an example.
Yep.
And because Knight is a native token, all of these, exchanges or partnerships, they're integrating Cardano, under the guise of Midnight, right? And the token holders on Cardano are going to be able to earn Knight tokens for staking to an SPO that runs Knight. So it's going to be bringing incentives back to the people that are actually running the Cardano blockchain. So I think it's also going to increase the interoperability between networks because they're trying to plug into Ethereum, they're trying to plug into Solana, and they're starting by plugging into Cardano. So I think it's going to be bring a world of new interoperability where I can have some tokens on Cardano. Maybe I want to do something on Solana. I can bring them over and vice versa to kind of use the different trade offs that the blockchains have. So I personally am pretty excited about it.
Totally. And I think one other thing we should mention is the push for Bitcoin DeFi and how Cardano can potentially become the go-to tool to do this. Can you explain what Bitcoin DeFi is, why Cardano is the chain to do it, and then what the significance of that all is?
Yeah. So earlier I mentioned this idea of high assurance code, right? So if we're looking at Bitcoin holders, there's a big need right now for Bitcoin holders to be able to take out loans on their Bitcoin because a lot of them don't want to sell. They don't want to
Yes.
pay that capital gains tax that comes with that. So, what we saw in the last cycle is a lot of people were using platforms like Celsius or BlockFi
Yes.
that eventually went belly up and stole billions of dollars for people.
I did that.
Yeah, I use Celsius too. I lost some money there. And, you know, there's a clear need there. People want to take out loans on their Bitcoin and people want to earn yield on their Bitcoin. But because the Bitcoin blockchain doesn't have smart contracts, there's no way to currently do that. And if you look at blockchains now, there's really two different models that people can, use. Cardano and Bitcoin and Nervos and a couple others, they use UTXO. And that is the foundation in which the transactions are constructed. So Bitcoin and Cardano are the same. Ethereum went about it in a different way, right? They used the account model, right? So because Bitcoin and Cardano are so similar in the way that they were constructed, and Cardano has this high assurance, smart contract writing, Cardano is a very good option for these Bitcoin holders to use DeFi, given that there's a trustless bridge from Bitcoin to Cardano where people can bring their Bitcoin over, they can take out a loan on it, and then they can start to earn some yield on that Bitcoin. So the reason that Ethereum is not really a good option is because all of the bridge hacks, the code isn't as, high assurance. It's a bit harder to, develop, surely like, true deterministic code with it. I think Cardano is a great option, to unlock, essentially a multi-trillion dollar DeFi ecosystem for Bitcoin.
Massive. Yeah, there's so many people that are Bitcoin purists that really don't want to do anything unless it's Bitcoin. And I think one of the amazing things about us being built on the same underlying technology, Cardano Bitcoin, is that you people can use this to conduct the things they want, and it always seems like it's only using Bitcoin, which is honestly amazing. When you look at how many people hold Bitcoin, if even a small fraction of that starts operating and doing things that is technically within the Cardano ecosystem, it's just that's such a big thing. If we can pull it off and make it happen and make it easy to use, like the amount of money that can come into the ecosystem is pretty damn insane. So thank you for explaining that. I know that confuses a lot of people, myself even included. So thanks for running through that. So you talk about this stuff all the time on your channel. What is your YouTube channel? What's your Twitter? Share all that stuff.
So my Twitter is BIGPEY. YT, so BigPey YouTube is my Twitter. And then on
Cool.
YouTube, it's just BigPey. And then
Sweet.
if you want to join the Atrium community, if you ever have any or crypto questions, just go to discord.gg/Atrium and we can answer all
Amazing.
of those for you there.
Sweet. If you're watching this, it is linked down below. So everything that Peyton just mentioned, you can easily find in the description box down below. Just scroll down there, go check out Peyton's stuff. He's constantly posting content just like this, wealth of knowledge, super well connected, and awesome dude. So thanks so much, Peyton. I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely, man. We'll talk soon.